Thanks for joining Variety to talk about Defending Jacob, which obviously just came out with its series finale on Apple TV+. First of all, I want to preface for the audience, if you haven't seen it yet, we are going to dive into some pretty specific details. So please go watch it first and then come back and watch this. Right. But Chris, I am curious for the character perspective. Like Andy Barber is this guy who, was comfortable telling little lies throughout his marriage and his life. And kind of at the end there, it's a big one. Sure. With his grand jury and standing up for his wife and saying this is an accident when she drove the car into crashed the car. And I'm curious from your perspective, like, first and foremost, do you believe it was an accident? Did you need to believe it was an accident in order to play this guy who was
I think Andy has had a lifetime of experience of compartmentalizing his rationale in order to preserve a belief system. I think a lot of people who grow up with trauma in their past harness these coping mechanisms. They're capable of burying guilt and leaving things unexamined in order to survive. And as a result, Andy's had a lifetime of experience kind of separating that kind of swampy mess. And Laurie's character doesn't have those tools. And it's so strange because I'm so used to not being able to give spoilers, but go watch the show. I think as more information comes out and Laurie reconcile what she believes to be the truth with this idea of family, I think in order to prevent her from becoming a part of those lies, that's why that final act of hers was kind of a grasp at what she considered to be truth, real, and that meant more to her than this belief system or the identity of family, whereas Andy's identity is so tangled up in these monikers of father, of husband, of just normalcy, because again, he's coming from a really traumatic place. He's not willing to give it up. That's where that's where the road forward.
But it is interesting, I think, coming out when it is now, because obviously our sense of a moral North Star, I think I'll speak for the US, like it's a little skewed given the state of the world. Do you feel like this finale has more weight now because of what's happening and the things that we're seeing our leaders do or people in our lives do as they struggle with the new world?
Right. I see the nexus, but I don't know that, I think that would be a little bit of a reach for me to say that, yeah, that does have those layers. I think, if we were really trying to examine what is going on today, I think it could be done in a far better way than whatever. That's not what that show set out to explore. So I think it's, might be a bit too far to say that there's a connection there. Listen, but that's the beauty of film. If you see something and it means something to you in a certain way, great. But I think it would feel disingenuous for me to say that was an intent.
Right. And to be fair, the book did come out years ago, even before the show, obviously. Yeah. And so, the book, again, if viewers haven't read the book, this will be a little spoilery, but there was this sense in the book of, I think, a little bit more closure, because at the end, Jacob is no longer alive. Here in the show, Mark obviously changed that ending, and now this family, if and when this kid wakes up, has to deal with the consequences of everything. Did you approach that? Was there a feeling around that ending as more or less tragic, do you feel like, than if he had died in this version?
I don't think I would weigh it on the scale of more or less tragic. I think I would weigh it on the scale of more or less interesting. I think one of the best aspects of film, from my perspective, is being able to dissect and do a post-mortem later on. And I think this ending leaves far more, obviously, ambiguity and room for discussion and varying perspectives. And I think that is, in my opinion, a sign of a really effective story.
It's interesting because, obviously the show was shot in a time where the world looked very different than the world looks right now, but it's still dealing with the idea of, like, what is justice for this kid that was killed, for this kid that was accused, for this family now that's been embroiled in this bigger tragedy. So I am curious from your perspective, both as an actor and as an executive producer on the project, what you felt like that ending says about the sense of justice that they all really have.
Sure. Well, I mean, I looked at it less from the perspective of whether or not the judicial system did their job, and more about whether or not we as humans are able to compartmentalize what we need to do in order to kind of circumvent, you know, the conventional notion of law. You know, how far would you go to preserve your family, your son, your wife, your loved ones? And I think in that arena, law matters very little. You know what I mean? And I think, you know, the prison you're kind of trying to avoid is a prison from within. And I know that feels a little pretentious, but it's kind of accurate. You know what I mean? I don't think Andy or Lori are really worried about the law so much as what it means for their lives. You know, as I said earlier, not to retrace lines, but both of their identities are so entangled in this concept of family, and it's been the foundation of an entire belief system, and to kind of lose that in such a short amount of time, I think is just too much for certain people to cope with, and yeah, I think that's where they're willing to bend sort of their moral North Star, and like I said, I think that's more of the interesting perspective than whether they're willing to break actual laws.